Okay, we're back. That last quote was by Origin 185 to 254, so another early father. And if this all seems kind of strange and radical and new to you, I invite you to consider the possibility that it could have its precursors, at least, in a form of Christianity that was very, very early. There were many competing versions of Christianity running around, and something very much like this may very much have been one of them. Page 406. Created theocentric, God-centered, the fathers believed man's deification was rooted in his creation, God's plan from the beginning. According to Paul, Adam filled his divine center with his own desires and gratifications, thus aborting his ultimate deification. So for Paul, Christ came to restore man's original nature in order to go forward to his ultimate destiny. Christ, then, was the corrective to the idea Adam had ruined it for mankind, for Christ revealed man was created to be more than he is now anyway, more, that is, than Adam ever was, which means a radical change and transformation into what man is not now. He must undergo Jesus' same death of his personhood to come to the revelation of the true eternal Christ, which is the resurrection. From here, man ascends into the glory of God to share in God's own divine nature, 2 Peter 1:4. And having the mind of Christ, participating in God's own divine knowing. This and much more is how it will go. Obviously, it is a mistake to think there is anything eternal about man's human nature as man knows it now. Maximus defined this beautifully. Like a wheel, Christ at the center, all people have the same center into which Christ draws back to himself the distinct elements of their being, which he brought into existence: one body, one mind, one glory. So just in keeping with the thing, the habit of reading everything I've written, she never came back from the dead. In the death of self, in her example, it was not a near-death experience. She never came back, yet her organs continue to function. She was the opposite of a zombie, even though she writes about being the walking dead. You've heard that a couple of times. Long before the revelation of Christ, among the eclectic religious sects, there developed various paths and disciplines by which they sought the goal of deification, to become one with the One. An interesting epithet of one cult's motto was, "I was not, I was, I am not, I don't care." No one left to care, that is. In Latin, I think it reads, "Was not, was, am not, don't care." Because the Stoics regarded the One as impassible, immovable, and unchangeable, in sharp contrast to man's ever-changing passibility, the ultimate goal was to become as immovable, impassible, and unchangeable as the One. Since the logoi, present in everyone, was the impassible still point or center of his being, one must conform himself to this inner logoi and learn to live from this silent center, ever mindful of it. Maximus refers to this divine center of being. A clean heart might be said to be one which has not at all any natural movement in any way whatsoever. The Lord comes to it in perfect simplicity, and as on a beautifully clean tablet, writes his own laws on it. End quote. Those who know what is called a unitive state know by experience the divine center of being is impassible. Nothing can ever touch it, neither fear, bliss, or anything in between. God is the soul's impassible divine center, and we ourselves its passible circumference. This fact is much akin to the Stoics' understanding of a state they called apatheia, where no passions or emotions reach to the center. So any idea God is subject to man's human experiences divides man's experience of God as impassible. This is why the Stoics taught that man must live by reason, logos, and not by his passions and emotions, which only lead to suffering. Although some thought it impossible to permanently attain this Stoic goal, apatheia, in this life, yet all regarded it as man's eternal oneness with the divine logos. We will not go into other notions of deification such as gnosis and contemplation as the ultimate goal, but stick to the particular path of transformation bequeathed to the Christian tradition by the Fathers. This is my note at the bottom of the page. To have the mind of Christ is not to have the mind of Jesus, but of divine wisdom, God's own knowing called the Logos. It is the only kind of knowing left after consciousness is gone. Back to the text, bottom of 407. While today we think of achieving a state of apatheia as a kind of psychological discipline, for the Fathers achieving a state of theosis could only be done by supernatural grace. Thus, for Irenaeus, Christ was the way of transformation. Christ became what we are in order to cause us to be what he is himself. Deification comes about through baptism and the Eucharist. End quote. Baptism and the Eucharist, then, were the grace-giving mysteries of Christ's transformative way. Though originally baptism and Eucharist were called the mysteries of Christ, the Western Church later called these sacraments, an unfortunate misnomer. Cyril's definition of hypostatic union as the oneness of Christ's dual natures never meant becoming one with the one, of attaining union, theosis, or deification. The uniqueness of Cyril's term is pointing out that this was no union that man could ever attain or affirm of himself. This was not his union with God, but rather God's eternal union with its own human nature. This is not a union with any particular human being or person, but a union solely with the bare essence of mankind. As a union formed and found solely in God, it is beyond man's own knowing and experiencing. Anything man can experience, he can describe, locate, affirm, and define to some extent. Yet a oneness solely in God defies all this, which is why it can only be revealed. Hypostatic union, then, is the only term that defines the eternal oneness of Christ and sets it apart from all other known types of union man can know or experience. The reason for going over this is to point out the difference between the second and third states in the life of Christ. If the second is as much as has been defined theosis, or in the West, mystical union, this is obviously not man's final estate or as far as man is destined to go. This is me inserting here just so everyone's very, very clear. The second state is the absence of the ego, and the third state is the absence of all of self and consciousness. Back to the text. This was solely Christ's earthly oneness with God, the same every Christian can experience on earth, a state, however, that must undergo a radical change to become the third or final estate in God. Death, resurrection, and ascension usher in a whole new and different existence, one no one could possibly grasp ahead of time, and anything said of it would not be welcomed anyway. For most people, man's final estate would be either unthinkable or frightening because it is nothing like man's earthly existence or his childish expectations of eternal life. In truth, man's eternal life in God is literally unthinkable. The deification of human nature, then, means its ultimate transcendence, a radical ontological change. Body and soul are elevated beyond all its known and earthly properties and faculties, beyond its own person or